I'm going to admit everybody in. Hello, everybody who's joining our call. Welcome, welcome, everyone. Nice to see folks, familiar faces. Good to see everybody. Let me go ahead and put folks on mute. And then just remember for our panelists when speaking, go ahead and unmute yourself. But thank you everybody for being here. What a great day it is today to share space with everybody. Welcome to our event on our webinar series for Uri L'Tzedek here. And it's what is the Jewish response to hunger and poverty? So we have a great list of panelists here today, starting off with our great friend, Hannah Weilbacher from our Jewish Advocacy and Engagement at Jewish World Service. We're so happy to have you. Hannah is an organizer and an advocate serving the American Jewish World Service as a program officer for the Jewish Advocacy and Engagement. Prior to joining AJWS, Hannah worked at the Jewish Social Justice Roundtable, a coalition of progressive organizations pursuing social justice from a Jewish perspective. Hannah, we're so happy to have you. As well as our friend Josh Protas from MAZON, who we're so excited to be in sharing space with him, a Jewish response to hunger. Make sure y'all follow MAZON and make sure y'all follow American Jewish World Service on Facebook as well. Josh Portis is the Vice President of Public Policy and heads the Washington, D.C. office at MAZON. In his role, which was assumed in 2012, Josh coordinates and implements MAZON's advocacy and agenda, including efforts to protect and strengthen the federal nutrition safety net, which particularly emphasizes on food security needs for seniors, veterans, and military families. Josh, thank you so much for being here. And last but not least, my great friend and mentor, Rabbi Shmuley Yanklowitz, founder and president of Uri L'Tzedek, a great inspiration to all of us. I'm so happy to be here and share space with all three of you. So Rabbi, please take it away and start us off with some great Torah.
So much. Thank you. Thank you so much, Eddie and Josh and Hannah. Thank you for being with us. This is, I admire the work you all do so much, and I'm thrilled to think about this together. And I'm only going to take about 10, 15 minutes max, 10 to 12 minutes to charge us a little bit with some Torah. So then we can move towards what we can do together, because there's so much to do. But this is such an obvious Jewish issue, right? Because the very first wrong that happens in the Torah is about food. The very first sin, so to speak, is about a food choice. It is what we do with food that determines our moral essence. They eat from the Eitz Hadat Tov Ra, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And the moral consciousness is born from the first act of food consumption. That is to say, what we eat and what we do with the food, more than anything else perhaps, is indicative of who we are. That's the Garden of Eden. That is the Garden of Eden, and that is still today. That is still today what we're doing today. But this is not only the Garden of Eden. If we think back to the Shoah, Primo Levi writes in the Shoah that the hardest time in Auschwitz was the brief period after the Nazis left and before the Soviets arrived, because there was no order. It was just quiet. And so he said this was a very difficult time. And then all of a sudden, a man ran into the center square with a sack of potatoes he had found and started passing out the potatoes. And he said, what was amazing about this moment is that any starving person would hide themselves away and keep the food for themselves. But he passed out the potatoes. And he said in that moment, for the first time in years, he regained his humanity. Because what is constitutive of our humanity is our capacity to give. In particular, our capacity to feed others who need food makes us human beings. I love American Jewish World Service, Hannah, and I've done work, as you know, with them for many years first as a student, as a participant, then as an educator in the field. With AJWS, I was in Guatemala, I was in El Salvador, I was in Thailand, I was in Senegal, I was in Ghana, I was in various countries with AJWS. It was deeply formative to who I am today, being in the global South doing that work. And I think of Mamadou all the time. I was in Senegal, and Mamadou, 8-year-old boy, jumped on a boat next to me, and he saw my shoe that needed repair, and so he asked to fix my shoe. And he spoke French, and I speak a little French, so I spoke with him. And I finally conceded that he could fix my shoe. And then he told me about his family. He told me about his family and how there were 8 children in the family, and the mother and father were sick, and they couldn't leave their little hut. Their hut was about a 12-foot by 12-foot little space where if it rained, the water would come through the holes. And he was the oldest. He was the oldest of the children. They were born one after the next, year after year. And he supported his family to eat by finding Westerners who had tears in their shoes to repair their shoes. And when I put on my shoes, I think of Mamadou. I think of Mamadou, which translates as Muhammad. As I think about what do I have, and what do I think of as disposable, dispensable, and what do I think of as giving me worth, and how do I keep Mamadou in my consciousness when I think about my own ethical consumption and the just distribution of resources in the world? How do I think of Mamadou when I think of winning the lottery, being born into 2020 America? I mean, 2020 America doesn't look so good in a lot of ways, but compared to the global situation, I mean, there are major blessings to being born into this current reality. I think of being in Ghana with AJWS, where we would dig a hole at night, and in this little village, and we would bury our food in the hole. And then one morning I went up to take a jog in the village, and I noticed the children were digging up the hole because the food that was our garbage was their food for the day. And I think about how we relate to food differently. I think of the foster children who just entered my home over these last few days. It's a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. And they have hunger issues. Because of their food insecurity, they can't stop eating in our house. They don't know when their next meal will be. And so anytime we feed them, they want more, they want more, they want more. They have diarrhea. I mean, they overeat. They're confused about what they're eating because they didn't have access in the sad situation of where they emerged from, of abuse and neglect. But not only of their abuse and neglect, but the neglect of the state, because we don't address food insecurity, because we don't address poverty, that actually that families like this can't get food is itself a shunda. And it's not only a shunda, it is Sodom. It is Sodom and Gomorrah, because Sodom, what does it say in the Midrash? Why did Sodom need to be destroyed? Well, lots of reasons, but here's one anecdote. A little girl fed bread to a hungry person, and the Sodomites hated that. And so they attack this girl. They attack this girl. And that is fundamentally the opposite of what we need to be. The opposite of Sodom, who hates the foreigner, who hates the hungry, right? Who shames the hungry for not taking care of themselves, for not picking themselves up by their bootstraps. Yom Kippur coming up. As you know, the Haftorah is amazing. The Haftorah comes from Isaiah. And I want to read it to you because as the holiest day of the year, the pinnacle of this moment, after the Torah reading, we get to the Haftorah, and here's what we read in Isaiah. It is not to share your bread with the hungry and bring homeless people into your house when you see the naked to cover them, and not to hide yourself from your own flesh. Then shall your light break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up speedily. Your righteousness shall go before you. The glory of the eternal shall be your rear guard. If you shall pour yourself out for the hungry and satisfy the desire of the afflicted, then shall your light rise in the darkness, and your gloom be as the noonday. And the eternal will guide you continually and satisfy your desire with good things and make your bones strong, and you shall be like a watered garden, like a spring of water whose waters fail not. And Isaiah chastises us. He says, you think fasting is what God wants? You think that standing here in prayer is what God wants? God wants you to fight for the oppressed. God wants you to stand up against injustice, and specifically share your bread with the hungry. The pinnacle of Yom Kippur, we read the Haftorah, and that's the rebuke of our prophet, of what we get. What does it mean to be a religious person? Not ritual-based. A religious person feeds the hungry. You address poverty. You address the oppressions that come from systemic racism and economic injustice. That's what it means, Isaiah is saying, is to be on the path of teshuvah, to repair ourselves and our world. It says in Bava Batra, a story about Binyamin Hatzadik in the Talmud, who was the supervisor of the community's tzedakah funds, that when food was scarce, a woman came to him and said, "Feed me, Rabbi, feed me." He replied, "I swear there's nothing in the tzedakah fund. There's nothing left. I'm sorry." He said, "If you don't feed me, a woman and 7 children will die." And immediately he fed her from his own money. This is not only about collective responsibility, it's about individual responsibility. It's not only about governmental legislation. As crucial as that is, it's about our communal institutions. What are we doing, right? 10% of our celebrations, the money should go to MAZON, right? To feed, that we offer that as one of their great campaigns, right? That in our home, how do we think about food? How do we think about waste? How do we think about tzedakah? It says in the Talmud in Ta'anit that Rav Huna would eat a meal, then he would open his door and said, whoever is in need, let that person come and eat. It's not just the Pesach Seder, whoever's hungry, come and eat. Rav Huna, every day, come and eat, come and eat. Midrash Vayikra Rabbah. This is not only about doing it, but about our attitude toward it. It says, if the rich person says to the poor person, why don't you go to work and get food? Look at those hips of yours. Look at those legs. Look at your fat body. Look at those lumps of flesh. God says to the rich person, it is not enough that you've not given him enough and helped him out, but now you also set evil eyes upon him. You mock him. This is our culture today, that we mock people in poverty. We mock people who are hungry. How can they be obese, right? How can they not take care of themselves and their children? Bad parents, neglectful parents, right? We shame them in addition to not meeting the systemic needs. It says in the Sifrei, to one for whom bread is suitable, give bread. To the one who needs dough, give dough. To the one for whom money is required, give money. To one for whom it is fitting to put the food in that one's mouth, put it directly in the person's mouth. And then we know from the Shulchan Aruch, how far do we have to go? It says, look, 20% max, 10% minimum. 10% of your income goes to the needs of others. I don't care how rich you are or how poor you are, the Talmud says, you give 10% of your income. You make $20,000 a year, you give $2,000 away. You make $200,000 away, you give $20,000 away. But 20% max. Nobody's expected to solve the problem all themselves. The average American, last I checked, gives about 1%. Some people say, I'm having a good year, I'm having a bad year, I'll give more this year, less this year, 10% minimum. This is, to me, the identity of a Jew. A Jew, not that they showed up in synagogue in Yom Kippur. It's a beautiful thing. I love synagogue in Yom Kippur. Did you give your 10%? Did you stretch yourself to give your 10%? Right? That's, to me, what it means. That would be the spiritual revolution of the Jewish people. Here's a last source, so then I'll pass it over to my friends and colleagues here. Rabbi Shalom of Karlin of the 18th century said, if you want to raise a person from the mud and from the filth, do not think it's enough to keep standing on top and reaching a helping hand down to the person. You must go all the way down yourself, down into the mud, down into the filth. Then take hold of the person with strong hands and help to pull that person and yourself out of the light. We can't remain removed. It's not an abstraction that we go to this website instead of that website so we don't see the pain, that we go on this highway instead of that highway so we don't have to encounter it, right? That we choose to read this statistic instead of that. We got to encounter these realities of the invisible people, of the unheard cries, and feel the call, that the call doesn't just come from the Torah. It doesn't just come from our hearts and from the conscience, and from our conscience. The call comes from the people and their suffering itself. And so, friends, AJWS and MAZON are leading the fight. What an honor to us as Jews that we have organizations like this. We do our part here at Arizona Jews for Justice, our part at Uri L'Tzedek, to stand up for justice, and to have partners like this, that AJWS, to represent the American Jewish community, the global Jewish community in fighting global poverty. MAZON, to represent the American Jewish community in fighting food insecurity in America. And to do it not just with passion, which I carry and we all carry, but to do it with sophistication and strategy and partnership and allyship in the deepest way. And to have these scholars and friends share ideas with us on how we can grow in our participation as individuals, as voting citizens, and as community members who can get our communities more involved is really an honor and delight. And so I look forward to the conversational mode where we might come back to some of these Jewish ideas if folks want to. And with that, I want to step back so that Eddie can introduce our next part of the program.
Certainly. Thank you so much, Rabbi. So Hannah, if you can go ahead and take it away.
I'd love to. Thank you so much, Rabbi, for that Torah, for those words of inspiration, for your ongoing partnership, for those stories. It really means so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah Weilbacher. I work at American Jewish World Service. AJWS is the Jewish global human rights grant-making and advocacy organization in the U.S. Each year, AJWS supports over 450 grassroots human rights organizations in 19 countries across the world, and we seek to elevate our partners' advocacy goals to the United States government. AJWS mobilizes rabbis, cantors, other leaders in the American Jewish community who are committed to advocating for policies that will foster justice and human rights around the world. So I'm excited to share with you all our Jewish response to poverty, which of course connects with why people are hungry. And I'm so glad for virtual opportunities. And if you're watching and you're here on Zoom or Facebook, thank you. Although I have to say, I wish that we were sitting together around a table or was able to look each of you in the eye, but I'm grateful for virtual opportunities that allow us to be together, and I'm really happy to be here and be able to share the Zoom room with Josh, who's an incredible advocate who I know will give you concrete action and to take, and MAZON does incredible work. So I work on our Jewish engagement and advocacy. So I would like to share what our response to global poverty is, and why we do it as Jews. So I like to think about how, we know that Judaism has what to say about the most complicated issues of our time. There's wisdom. Justice is a core part of the Jewish story, right? This is evident in example after example in Torah and Talmud, some of which the rabbi opened with already. And no one is inventing justice or service as activities for the 21st century Jewish community because we think it's cute or we think it's a shiny new toy. This is embedded in our history. At AJWS, we offer a special opportunity for American Jews to direct their tzedakah towards addressing the root causes of poverty, of oppression, injustice across the globe. And we address root causes by working in partnership and by listening, because those closest to the problem see the solutions the clearest. So I want to highlight the Torah's concern that we care for strangers. AJWS supports communities around the world, regardless of religion, and I often get questions about that. Why don't we only focus on supporting Jews, which there are other wonderful organizations who do. Care for the stranger is embedded in the very fabric of Jewish civil law from the Torah onward, right? The Torah itself mentions this mandate 36 different times. To take just one example, Exodus 23:9, you shall not oppress the stranger. You know the soul of the stranger because you were strangers in the land of Egypt. The Jewish tradition takes this, defining experience that turns the Jews from a family into a nation, slavery in Egypt and the redemption, and reminds us again and again and again that this experience should generate empathy for those who live as minorities in society. And that's why we work with people around the world, no matter their religion. So I'd love to tell you a little bit more about how we address these root causes. So AJWS invests in organizations who understand the problems in their own communities and have built enduring relationships with marginalized people and are best equipped to realize their own visions for justice. The populations that AJWS supports are often underfunded and are excluded from decision-making processes, from mainstream social movements, and from the halls of power. So AJWS works in 4 main issue areas. They're all connected to poverty in some way, all connected to reasons why people are poor or hungry, and I'd encourage you to kind of listen for those connections as I go over them very briefly. So four main issue areas. The first is sexual health and rights. The second is civil and political rights. The third is land, water, and climate justice. And the fourth is disaster and humanitarian response. So to go through those very briefly, in sexual health and rights, we support organizations who are empowering women and girls and LGBTQI people to stop violence and discrimination and live with dignity, with safety, with health. In land, water, and climate justice, we support grassroots groups who are slowing climate change, who are protecting the land, water, and natural resources that rural and indigenous people depend on for survival. Civil and political rights, think about the civil rights and the democracy protections we need in the United States. You can imagine that's needed in other countries as well. So we aid communities to fight for civil and political rights around the globe, promoting justice under the law for all. promoting the right to be heard, to vote, to participate in political life. And the last one, disaster and humanitarian response, we support organizations that save lives and build more equitable societies in the wake of disasters of hurricanes, earthquakes, epidemics. And for all of these, we take what we call a grassrooted approach. So we have in-country staff in the countries we work in, always people from the community or longtime residents. And these staff are themselves connected to the social movements and the justice organizations that we support. Community-based grassroots groups are at the core of AJWS's grant making and of our response to poverty and hunger. The defining characteristic of these groups is that they are all self-organized to address the problems that affect them at the local level. However, we fund organizations that range from a single individual starting up a new initiative to large, national, regional, global organizations that support important aspects of these grassroots groups' social change agendas. And the perspectives and priorities of our grantee partners then inform our advocacy work in the United States government, which takes us to what we can do together, how we can help. What can we do as Jews? Well, we can educate ourselves and we can advocate. We can promote a human rights focused approach to the way that we want to see the United States be in the world, right? Instead of a paternalistic, we know what's best model, which has proven to fail or harm, we can promote a human rights focused approach. Something else we can start to do is expand our universe of obligation, right? Which just is a nice way of saying, who do we feel obligated to, right? For me, it might be my family, my neighborhood, the Jewish people, women. These are people I feel obligated to. But can we hold that, if we care for our family or for our Jewish community so much, that we want all people to be loved, to be cared for just the same, right? So we're expanding our universe of obligation. As Label Fine said in Smashing Idols, universalism and particularism are not mutually exclusive. They are complementary, and the ideal relationship between them is one of creative tension rather than head-on antagonism. So from there, once we expand our universe of obligation, we can see opportunities to act and we can take them. So at AJWS, our DC office, our Capitol Hill office, works to advance policies that will support our grantee partners. So for example, we're working to pass a bill pledging US support to the Rohingya refugees who fled Burma or Myanmar from Bangladesh. So I know that many of you who are watching this know about the horrific Rohingya genocide. And this is really a moment when the Jewish community is acting on our promise of never again. This is in real time. So that piece of legislation that we're fighting for includes targeted sanctions, humanitarian assistance, and mechanisms for documentation with the goal of finding justice for the crimes of genocide committed and other ways to support the refugees from the Rohingya genocide and the survivors. So we worked with leadership representing the Rohingya community to think about language for that bill, and we worked with congressional allies on Capitol Hill to introduce bills in the House and Senate, and and to push for inclusion of as much as we could in other legislative ways. For those curious, the bill has passed the House of Representatives, but the Senate, in particular Senator McConnell, has refused to take it up, so it's currently stalled. And that's how we kind of see these connections that we're making on Capitol Hill. So protecting human rights, as Shmuley said, is a very Jewish thing to do. The very idea of global human rights grew up out of the ashes of the Holocaust. Many of you might know this. In the wake of the genocide, nations around the world began to take very seriously the need for a framework that enumerated the basic rights that all people have just as a virtue of being human, and a system of institutions to address these rights that transcended national boundaries. So 3 years after the Holocaust ended, the United Nations adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is a document that aims to protect all people from the degradation and the destruction that Jews and other oppressed peoples experienced. Jews themselves were deeply involved in the creation of modern human rights. Raphael Lemkin, a Polish Jewish legal scholar, helped develop the concept of human rights, was known for coining the term genocide, and other Jews were instrumental in creating the human rights frameworks that we rely on today. And human rights is a global, and for me, it feels specifically Jewish response to the Holocaust. As it has developed and transformed since then, Jews have continued to see how protecting global human rights and the guarantees promised in the Declaration of Human Rights is crucial for Jews and all minority groups and marginal people, right? It's for all. So to close and to answer this, this opening question, or this question of the Jewish response to poverty, to hunger, I want to say that a response to poverty and hunger, as Shmuley actually laid out, is to give money directly. So I once worked at a food pantry where I spent my time stocking shelves with donated cans, among other things. And we also would spend the money that donors gave us directly in bulk food stores to purchase food for our clients who didn't have food for dinner for their children. And I learned we had a food purchasing staff member that was like his leadership, was to coordinate the purchasing of this food. And I learned two really important things from him about why he so much preferred to receive money directly than to receive a canned good as a donation. He would tell me that with 69 cents, I could buy a can, but he could buy 10 cans. And he knows his clients, and they'd actually be the cans of food that they actually want, rather than the 100 cans of pumpkin filling we somehow always had left over, especially after November time, that no one wanted because it was not part of a nutritious meal. And from that, I learned how important it is to give money directly to organizations, or better yet, individuals, and to trust people to know how to spend those resources. We see the same problem in our international development work. After humanitarian disasters around the world, people send blankets and teddy bears to those in need. It turns out that in places like Haiti, after a massive earthquake, blankets are of little use in the tropical climate. And now the communities have to deal with all the blankets that are coming in. And while direct aid to locally trusted groups and leaders on the ground is always a key ingredient in successful rebuilding after any catastrophe. And for me, because I'm someone who works on, engagement and wanting to support people and taking action, I know that giving money and then stepping back, while ultimately helpful for a cause, feels unsatisfying. It doesn't give that productive, connected feeling that you get when you give something more tangible. And that's why I encourage folks to give their time as well, to volunteer, to organize, to help get out the vote for elections, and organize for lasting policies in your community that address why people are hungry. I'm sure Josh will give us some really great ideas very shortly. There are obvious reasons why people go hungry in our country. We need higher wages, we need better jobs, we need better benefits. I mean, do you know that the tipped minimum wage in the US is just a few dollars and it hasn't been raised even with the pandemic? So trust the people who are poor and hungry to tell you what their needs are. Work in your own community, but open your universe of obligation in your heart to see that there is indeed room for those in your city and your country and for your fellow humans around the world, no matter where they live, who all face surprisingly similar problems and whose solutions, therefore, you could be a part of. So with that, I'll close. I want to thank Uri L'Tzedek for inviting me, and I'm excited to turn it over to Josh to tell us about his perspective from MAZON.
Great. Thank you so much, Hannah. It's great to join you for this conversation, and thank you, Rabbi Shmuley and Uri L'Tzedek, and for everybody who's joined. These are such important issues at a critical time right now. MAZON, a Jewish response to hunger, focuses on the tremendous needs right here in this country, and we're really glad to be able to complement the conversation about the terrific work that AJWS is doing on the international front. But people are shocked to know about the severity of hunger in this country. MAZON was born out of the vision that regardless of a person's circumstance, no one deserves to be hungry. We were founded in 1985, actually I think the same year as AJWS, in the midst of the Reagan administration and attempts to scale back the social safety net in this country. And at that same time, the beginnings of the food bank system, an emergency food system that didn't exist before and really should never have been created because our government should be taking care of the needs of the most vulnerable. And yet there's been this tension where our government agencies have been contracting in very problematic ways. Right now, in the midst of this pandemic, the needs are growing exponentially. So before the pandemic, nearly 40 million Americans were struggling with food insecurity, struggling to put food on the table. And let's just think about that for a minute and put that in context. 40 million people, that's larger than the entire population of Canada. In the United States, the wealthiest country on the face of this earth, we have 40 million of our neighbors, our friends, our family members who struggle to put food on the table. That's astounding. There's no reason that should exist. And it's not for a lack of food. It's a lack of the political will to make sure that the food gets to those who need it. Now, in the context of the pandemic with spiking unemployment rates, tens of millions of additional Americans are struggling to put food on the table. Estimates are that 1 in 4 children in this country are going to be dealing with food insecurity because of the pandemic. Think about that. Think about your children in their classes. 1 in 4 of those children struggling to put food on the table. 1 in 6 Americans are projected to deal with food insecurity. And at the same time that this is happening, that we're facing this crisis, we have leaders in this country who are trying to scale back the nutrition assistance that's available through our governmental programs. It should never be this way. It should never be this way. And our Jewish teachings command us to act differently. So just a few words of Torah too, to add to what Rabbi Shmuley had to offer. There's so much in our tradition that teaches us about our commandments to take care of the most vulnerable. In Deuteronomy, in different sections, we're told there shall be no poor among you. And then we're also told, for there will never cease to be needy ones in your land. So there's this paradox that there should not be poor among us, and yet there always will be. And that reflects on our obligation, our collective responsibility, that we know that poverty will always be a challenge, that hunger will always be a challenge, and it's incumbent upon us to rise up to meet that need. We're commanded to set aside the corners of our fields for the poor, the widow, the orphan, the stranger. Well, we're not all farmers today. We don't all have fields. So how do we fulfill that mitzvah, that obligation? Part of it is through tzedakah, but part of it is in this country through our programs like the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, formerly known as food stamps. Programs that fulfill our collective responsibility to take care of the most vulnerable, to make sure that they don't have to depend on charity. Charity alone will never address the issue of hunger in this country. And Mazon's work is fundamentally about the advocacy that is critical to make sure that we have the supports in place, that they're strengthened, that they're improved, and that they fully meet the needs that exist. So I want to put a few slides up. Let me try and share my screen. Hopefully this will work. So advocacy is at the heart of everything that Mazon does. Private charity can never be the answer to addressing hunger in this country. The charitable response could never fill the gap if government programs continued to be cut back, or even if they were fully meeting the need. But the overwhelming majority of food assistance in this country, just to put in context, comes from federal nutrition assistance programs. Only about 5% of nutrition assistance, of food assistance in this country comes from the charitable sector. Many of our congregations do food drives, especially around the high holy days. And Hannah mentioned the importance of donations to food pantries, to food banks. I want to kind of add to that we need to have a both and response, that it's important that we have the emergency assistance to make sure that we're meeting the needs that exist today, and that we have to have robust and strong advocacy for nutrition programs from our governmental programs that ensure that people don't fall on hard times, to systemically deal with this issue, to prevent people from needing that emergency assistance. Our food bank network has grown exponentially in this country, and there's no reason that it should. We should be able to take care of those who struggle through our tax-paying dollars that go to support programs like SNAP, that go to support Meals on Wheels, that go to support child feeding programs. And yet we continue to have public leaders who want to make cuts to the budgets and scale back these programs. It's a very dangerous time right now. And in the midst of a pandemic, we have leaders at the U.S. Department of Agriculture who are pushing forward with proposed rules that would make it harder to qualify for SNAP. We have members in Congress who don't want to give a boost to SNAP as part of a COVID relief package. We need to do much more, and the needs are urgent right now. The thrust to SNAP right now, I just want to make a note about SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. This is the cornerstone of the federal nutrition safety net. And we've had, over the last 10 or so years, a really concerted effort to scale back that program, to cut funding for that program. And again, even in the midst of this pandemic, we have members of Congress who are trying to chip away at this program that fundamentally protects the dignity of those who are struggling by giving them some extra purchasing power to be able to put food on the table. SNAP is serving tens of millions of people, close to 40 million Americans before the pandemic, and there's a need right now to expand access during the pandemic. Part of the HEROES Act that was passed by the House of Representatives several months back and has not been met by a corresponding bill on the Senate side included a 15% boost to the maximum SNAP benefit. People who've been left out of COVID relief to this point are the most vulnerable Americans, people who have no other source of income, and SNAP is one of the few things that's helping them to stay afloat. And yet rising food prices are making it more difficult for them to put food on the table. And we've turned our backs on these people who have no other help, and refusing to give them the added help that they need at this time of crisis. One of the things that MAZON has done is really listen to our partners on the ground, our food banks, food pantries, multi-service agencies that we work with across the country, to recognize populations whose needs aren't getting addressed and aren't getting met. Populations that are oftentimes surprising, like military families and veterans, people in Indian country who have been the hardest hit in the COVID pandemic, and whose food insecurity needs have long been overlooked by public officials. MAZON leads the way in calling attention to these special populations and making sure their needs are recognized, and that our policies are addressing the needs for those who need that extra help. My slides aren't fully working, so I just want to mention a couple of ways to get involved right now. So with advocacy being so fundamental, in a recognition that the charitable sector can never fill the gaps when we have cutbacks to our public programs, there's an urgent need right now for Congress to take action, especially in the COVID context with the next COVID relief package. Again, the HEROES Act was passed by the House of Representatives that had meaningful, robust supports for the SNAP program, a boost to SNAP benefits, as well as extensions for the pandemic EBT program. That's a program that is filling in to provide school meals for children who have lost access to free and reduced price school meals because of school closures. That program is set to expire September 30th. Most schools are not going back after September 30th. We don't know necessarily when schools are coming back, but we have kids, millions of kids around the country who stand to lose access to these meals, and millions of Americans who just don't have enough to make ends meet. And the United States Senate has been missing in action on this. They have not come forward with a bill that includes meaningful relief for those who are struggling, and they need to take action, and the administration needs to take action. So on MAZON's website, there's an action alert that you can click on to write to your members of Congress, and particularly your senators, urging them right now to take action on a COVID relief bill that has to fully meet the needs of those who are struggling in this pandemic context. Also wanted to note, for those of you who are involved with synagogues, MAZON has a robust array of curriculum resources and engagement resources that we'd love for you to use. Many of you had experienced our traveling exhibition, This is Hunger, which features the images and real stories of individuals who struggle with food insecurity across the country from very different backgrounds and the personal and painful experiences that they've dealt with. This traveling exhibition is now in a digital form and is available for synagogue usage, for social action committees, and for a program that you can do virtually. So my colleague Paul Sherman is on the webinar now, and if you go to MAZON's website, you can find information about This is Hunger. It's a great way to start engaging members of your community about the issue of food insecurity and hunger and what you can do. And we also have, for any clergy members who are on the webinar today, Jewish community clergy mission, Jewish justice mission around food insecurity issues. This will be our 3rd annual event that includes a virtual Hill Day. So in the COVID context, we're going virtual, but we'll have opportunities to hear from leading experts on policy, from members of Congress, and from other clergy about the Jewish community responsibility to engage on these issues and how you can engage your congregations. This will be coming up November 17th to 19th with virtual sessions and then a virtual fly-in on Capitol Hill. And we'd welcome, for all of the clergy who are on the call today, or for any of you involved with your congregations, let your clergy members know, because we'd love to have you join us. So thanks again for the opportunity to raise attention about these issues. I'm looking forward to the question and answer session.
Thank you so much to all 3 of you. The next question I have here is both for Hannah and Josh. Personally, why do you do this work? What does it mean to you to continue to fight for justice, whether that be fighting for the justice of folks struggling in poverty and hunger?
I can start, and then Hannah, would love to hear your thoughts. Fundamentally, this speaks to my identity as a Jew, and I think to the values that really resonate with me, and something fundamental about our collective responsibility to take care of those in our community and those in our country and around the world. I will say doing this advocacy work is extremely frustrating, and it's oftentimes fighting off harmful attacks and playing defense, and it's a very slow process, and you don't get quick wins in doing this. And it's so vitally important that we keep fighting for this, because poor people don't have a lobby. There aren't lobby groups for poor people. We're the ones who lift up their voices and listen to them and give them opportunities that their needs get heard. And that is sacred work. It really is. And it feels like doing this advocacy work is fulfilling those words of Torah about how we need to be in the world, how we need to do acts of tikkun olam, and how we need to make sure that that we're systemically addressing these issues, not just putting band-aids on the problems, knowing that they're going to recur, but hopefully a longer-term systemic approach.
That definitely resonates with me, and thank you for the question. Actually, at the community service organization that I worked at many years ago that I referenced earlier, that had a food pantry, I was working there at the same time that I was a part-time tutor in a middle school, and there was once a kid who I saw like a few days that week who was just having a really hard time of it. And I was thinking about, like, from an educator perspective, how to help him with his math. And then one evening that week, I was working at the community service agency, and his mom came in, and we were chatting, you know, about him and how she's doing. And it turns out she had hit like horrible times. She had like something, you know, quite catastrophic had happened to her family, and she was there to get food for the week for her kids. And it was also at the same time that I was learning about community organizing actually from a Jewish perspective. And it felt so clear to me that, you know, whatever issue, I used to think I had to pick one issue, right? I had to decide on an issue of justice and pick it, and that would be my issue to work on. And the more I, you know, grew in this work and the more Jewish wisdom I've learned, all of these things are connected, right? The reason why someone is struggling in his 7th grade math class could be really similar to the reason why his mom is, you know, at a food pantry that week. And for all of those reasons, you know, if I can be a part of the solution by organizing for systemic change, that, you know, that has made me feel very powerful, as opposed to previously where I had felt really powerless to confront the issues of our time. So that was a pretty formative, like 1-2 punch, and has made me want to see how I can be a part of the solution since then.
Thank you. So folks, now we're gonna open up fully to our Q&A section. Right off the bat, we already have a question, and this could either be for both Josh or Hannah. Did any of the nonprofits you represent receive any of the CARES Act funding or assistance during the COVID pandemic? And if so, was it helpful to them?
Hannah, do you want to start?
Yes, and it's such a good question to think about, just the ways that the government is or isn't supporting our sector. I actually can't speak for AJWS. My understanding is I don't want to say anything that isn't true. So maybe I'll turn it to Josh and just pull up my email and make sure that I'm sharing. I don't think we got a ton of anything, but we have been doing okay, mostly actually because of the generosity of our supporters. But I'll try to see if I can find any more concrete information in the next few minutes.
Sure, and on the domestic front, there definitely was funding for the anti-hunger space in the CARES Act. Some of that went to boosts in some federal programs. Some of that went to the Emergency Food Assistance Program, which is federal commodities that go to food banks. Unfortunately, you know, one of the things that this administration did was to create a new infrastructure and a new program, the Farm to Families Food Box program that many of you have heard about. We have the opportunity to boost the SNAP program that would really help to fill the gaps right now and to meet the needs that exist. And this administration was trying to solve a couple of different problems at the same time by giving a boost to farmers and giving food boxes to people. And the rollout of this program was incredibly problematic. There were lots of problems with contracting agencies that had no experience in this, that added costs to food pantries and food banks to get the boxes to people, and people getting food that wasn't culturally appropriate or not food that they necessarily wanted to eat. So unfortunately, it's been a very mixed experience with the CARES Act. That some of the funding has been beneficial, but some of it was squandered, unfortunately, by the way that this administration rolled it out.
And yes, I just looked up that we did receive one of the loans from the Paycheck Protection Act program under the CARES Act, which luckily that's, you know, a lot of the amazing work of my colleagues to figure that out and make sure that our organization is doing well. So it would be to them to answer the question of how much it helped. I hope that it did.
Thank you. So we have one of our great friends here from Bread for the World, Lupe Conchas, and he asked, how is hunger and racial equity related?
That's a fantastic question, and thank you for asking that. Before the pandemic, racial equity was a significant factor in food insecurity in this country and around the world. I'll just speak domestically. We know that that the inequalities in terms of wealth and wealth accumulation between people of color and the white population are tremendous, and those have been exacerbated by the pandemic. There are long-standing historical reasons why those inequities exist and why they've compounded over time. And unfortunately, some of the pushback about supporting programs like SNAP, it's often racially coded language where there's an objection to handouts, quote, handouts to people that often are racially coded and biased, that perpetuate, unfortunately, a lot of the racial equity issues. So there's a lot that we need to do in this country to address those kind of issues. Programs like SNAP and child feeding programs through federal agencies go a long way towards providing necessary supports for communities of color. I mentioned Native American populations, and that's something MAZON has done a lot of leadership work on in addressing tribal sovereignty issues and exceptionally high rates of food insecurity in Indian country. So there's a lot of work still to do. The challenges in the context of the pandemic are tremendous, and much of them, Lupe, as you noted, are related to racial inequity challenges.
Yeah, I don't have much more to add because I really agree with what you just shared, Josh. And Lupe, if you work for Bread for the World, I bet you can answer this question with your eyes closed. Yeah, I mean, they're all connected, right? The reasons why people are hungry are very rarely an issue of, is there enough food and or are there enough resources? Same thing about poverty, and it's much more about, you know, who controls access and why is access denied. And we know that racism is, in many places, a state-sanctioned reason for resources to be denied. So incredibly connected. And thanks for the question.
Thank you to both of you. And then we have another question here. This one's specifically, I think, for MAZON. Josh, many years ago, this is from Stu Turgel. He says, many years ago, when my children were at B'nai Mitzvah, it was common for the congregation to encourage families to donate a percentage of the catering costs from the kiddush or party to MAZON. We were given table tent cards and to place at tables, letting guests know what we were doing. It has been many years since I've seen or heard of this. Does MAZON still work with synagogues on this, and has this practice fallen off, or am I just hanging in shuls that don't participate?
Great, thank you, Stu, for the question, and thank you for the longstanding support with MAZON. Yes, we've had a longstanding practice of community members making contributions in celebration of mitzvot, b'nai mitzvot, and other simchot. And we continue to welcome that, also for holiday celebrations. So that's still very much something that we do, and please contact us afterward. We're happy to connect with you about that. But we absolutely want the issue of hunger to be part of the consideration for family celebrations as well as holiday celebrations, and as a way of really setting aside the corners of our field, setting aside a bit of our celebration to make sure to be inclusive of those who are struggling.
Thank you for that. I appreciate everybody's questions here. Do we have any other questions? If not, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the questions on social media. So please, if you have a question right now, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask away. If not, we're going to go ahead and move to some of the questions on social media.
I just wanted to say thank you so much to Josh for coming to Arizona virtually. It's really good to have you here. And I'm just really excited to see all these anti-hunger advocates on the call.
Thank you, Lupe.
Thank you, Lupe. And it's actually coming back to Arizona virtually. I grew up in Phoenix, so glad to virtually get back.
We love that. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and ask one of the questions that was presented here on social media. And the question is, what is the biggest issue that has presented itself with the pandemic in terms of advocating for against hunger and poverty? We're hitting y'all with some good questions.
I'll mention it, and not trying to get too political, but I'm going to get political. So I mentioned the HEROES Act that was passed by the House months ago that really recognized the scale of need that exists, and that legislation included provisions not only for food insecurity, but also for unemployment assistance to states and local governments. And there's been a deafening silence on the Senate side. And we've seen Mitch McConnell say, well, we just need to wait and see what the needs are. And he doesn't seem to think the needs are as extensive as what the House has proposed. And I think there's been a real lack of leadership, unfortunately, and a lack of empathy and a disconnect between the needs of people in this challenging time. And I think a failure to recognize that people are hurting. They're hurting really badly. And this is the time when governments should be responding. This is the time to demonstrate leadership when there's an incredibly challenging situation that our country and our world are facing. This is the time to step up and to take action. This is what government is for. And over the last number of years, we've had philosophical discussions play out in political debates about what the proper scale and role of government are. And I think a moment like this, a crisis like this, is revealing about why we need a strong government to be there when times are challenging and to be able to adequately respond.
Yes. Hear, hear. And I would say from our perspective, one of the biggest challenges that we've seen, in addition to things like getting resources, getting even information, much less PPE to folks, I would say exacerbating existing inequalities and prejudices is really scary, and something that we're seeing happening, especially in a lot of places. Those prejudices are in different countries, even in our own, those prejudices are backed by power, right? And a lot of us know the equation that I don't know who I should attribute it to, some brilliant thinker. I'm sure that, for example, racism equals prejudice plus power. So when prejudices have power behind it, it can be really scary. For example, Rohingya people are being blamed for bringing COVID to various communities. People who are already oppressed are being blamed for different issues. Something that we saw earlier this year, for example, in Uganda, there was a violent raid of an LGBT shelter, and 19 young people were arrested and falsely accused of spreading COVID-19. This happened in March. And one of AJWS's partner organizations fought relentlessly for their release. It was a very intense legal battle, but all charges were dropped in May, and the young people won their freedom, which was amazing and is a success story. But a lot of people don't have that kind of success story, and a lot of people who are already oppressed or marginalized, that those prejudices are being exacerbated right now, which is why it's so important for us to, spread, correct information and understand that whatever we might be facing in our own countries, this is a pandemic and it's global, and other folks are experiencing it in similar or, in unique ways. And either way, the solutions are very connected.
Most definitely. Well, thank you so much to both of you for coming on this amazing webinar on what is the Jewish response to hunger and poverty. And it was really amazing to get both of y'all's insights on this. And personally, I really resonated with the stories that y'all shared onto the why the work, right? Why is this impactful, both from your spirituality and yourself, bridging everything towards your advocacy. It was just beautiful. And I really loved when Josh talked about the appropriate cultural food. I remember that brought me back into a warm memory here at Uri L'Tzedek and AJJ. We've had the blessing to help more than 40,000 asylum seekers. And I quickly remember when I got a call and we had about 10 Jewish women who were feeding these asylees, and they're like telling me, Eddie, they're not eating. We're worried. And I said, well, what did you feed them? They said, well, we made a lot of Israeli salad, but they're not eating. And I said, okay, let me come home and let me bring y'all some rice and some other different stuff that I'll assure you they'll eat. So that was a great blessing and a reminder of the humanity and how we bring back dignity. So folks, quick thank you to everybody who joined us. A quick reminder of our upcoming events. Please RSVP and join us. We have an event on Monday with Rabbi Shmuley Yanklowitz and Umar Hakim. Please RSVP. That is 2 to 3 p.m. Pacific time. Again, that's 2 to 3 p.m. Pacific time. Once more, thank you to our amazing speakers. Follow us on Facebook. Follow all the folks that you see here from MAZON and from Jewish World Service. Follow them on social media to stay in touch. We appreciate your time. A huge thank you to our friends, Hannah and Josh, for sharing some great wisdom with us. To everybody else, Shana Tova, have an amazing, sweet year. We look forward to seeing you soon. Take care, everybody.
Shana Tova, thanks so much.